August 11, 1941. A British Ordnance Board delivers its verdict on a new weapon prototype. The assessment is damning. The device would prove, quote, ineffective as an anti-tank weapon under any conceivable conditions of employment, end quote. The Director of Artillery agrees, the Assistant to the General Staff concurs, the project is terminated immediately. 3 years later, Canadian Army combat officers will rank that same weapon the most outstandingly effective weapon of the entire war, ahead of even the legendary Bren gun, ahead of mortars, rifles, grenades, everything. This is the story of how Britain's ugliest, heaviest, most brutal infantry weapon proved the experts catastrophically wrong. This is the story of the PIAT. The weapon they dismissed would destroy German tanks across Normandy. It would earn 6 Victoria Crosses. British paratroopers surrounded at Arnhem, facing overwhelming German armour, would desperately cry out for more of them. And by war's end, 115,000 of these supposedly useless devices would be manufactured. Several million rounds of ammunition produced. But in August 1941, none of that seemed remotely possible. The British Ordnance Board wasn't being unreasonable when they rejected the weapon. Their testing revealed catastrophic failures. A War Office report from June 1941 catalogued the disasters: flimsy construction, spigots that failed to fire when triggers were pulled, and most damning of all, none of the supplied projectiles actually exploded when they hit targets. Not one. The weapon was called the Baby Bombard. It was a liability, not an asset. British infantry would have to find their anti-tank capability elsewhere, except there was nowhere else to look, post-Dunkirk. Britain possessed no effective man-portable anti-tank weapon. The boy's anti-tank rifle had proven completely obsolete. Operational research after Operation Crusader in November 1941 couldn't find a reliable case of a boy's rifle knocking out a German tank. Britain stood alone. Invasion fears remained acute. North Africa demanded modern weapons, and the cupboard was bare. Desperate circumstances forced desperate decisions. In September 1942, barely a year after declaring the Baby Bombard ineffective under any conceivable conditions, the War Office reversed course completely. Major Millis Jeffress commanded Winston Churchill's secret weapons unit. The organisation was called MD1. Soldiers nicknamed it Churchill's Toy Shop. Jeffress took over the failed Baby Bombard project. He completely rebuilt the prototype from scratch. The weapon combined Lieutenant Colonel L.V.S. Blacker's spigot mortar concept with a hollow charge warhead. Imperial Chemical Industries merged features from both Blacker's design and Jeffress's modifications. The result was something utterly unlike any anti-tank weapon before or since. On August 31, 1942, it was approved for production. The official designation was Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. Soldiers would know it by its acronym. PIAT. Now, you need to understand something. The PIAT was designed to be difficult. It seemed almost engineered to punish the men who carried it. Weight, 32 pounds empty, 34.5 pounds loaded. The American bazooka weighed 13 to 16 pounds. The German Panzerfaust weighed 11 to 13 pounds. Carrying a PIAT through Normandy's thick hedgerows or up Italy's mountains was exhausting. British quartermasters initially issued the weapon without slings. Soldiers had to scrounge Bren gun straps or improvise with rifle slings just to carry the thing. But weight was the least of the PIAT's problems. The cocking mechanism was notorious. To cock the weapon, you placed the butt on the ground. Then you stood on the shoulder pad, pogo stick fashion. Then you pulled the entire 32-pound body upward against 200 pounds of spring tension. You pulled until it caught on the trigger with an audible click. The process demanded significant upper body strength and height. Soldiers of short stature often physically couldn't generate enough force. They simply weren't strong enough or tall enough to cock the weapon. Cocking while lying down was technically possible, but not practical under combat conditions. You had to expose yourself fully when repositioning. You had to stand up. The weapon was designed to automatically recock from firing recoil, but this mechanism frequently failed. If you didn't hold the shoulder pad firmly enough, it failed. If you released the trigger too early, it failed. Manual recocking mid-engagement meant standing fully upright under fire. As one official report noted, PIAT operators became clear targets to enemy infantry. Range and accuracy presented another problem. Official specifications listed 115 yards effective range. Battlefield reality told a different story. official British trials from 1944 revealed something sobering. Skilled users achieved only a 60% hit rate against a stationary tank at 100 yards. Against approaching targets, accuracy plummeted to 35%. Operators rushed their shots. The weapon's unusual mechanism produced inconsistent trajectories. A 12-pound weight shift occurred 0.1 seconds before the bomb released. This disrupted aim significantly. Most operators preferred engagements at 50 yards or closer. Many waited until 30 yards. Rifleman Ganju Lama would win the Victoria Cross for destroying 2 Japanese tanks in Burma. He explained his 30-yard range to General William Slim. Quote, "I was not certain of hitting with a PIAT beyond 30 yards." End quote. Recoil was brutal. Despite the spring absorption system, the PIAT delivered violent kickback. Severe bruising resulted if you didn't shoulder it properly. Veterans compared it to the infamous Boys anti-tank rifle. You could only safely fire it from prone positions or well-braced positions. Standing fire or improper firing risked serious shoulder injury. Sergeant Wagger Thornton fought on D-Day. He captured soldier sentiment perfectly. Quote, "The PIAT actually is a load of rubbish, really. The range is around about 50 yards and no more. Another thing is you must never, never miss. If you do, you've had it. By the time you reload the thing and cock it, which is a bloody chore on its own, everything's gone. You're done." End quote. So the weapon was heavy, difficult to cock, inaccurate beyond 50 yards, brutal to fire, and absolutely unforgiving if you missed your first shot. What could possibly go right? Sicily, July to August 1943. The PIAT's combat debut. It was a disaster. The ammunition catastrophically failed. Bombs misfired unless they struck targets perfectly square on. During attacks on 3 enemy tanks, bombs bounced off armour and failed to detonate. The faulty number 425 impact fuse required near-perpendicular hits to activate. This was an impossible demand in fluid combat. Official post-battle analysis revealed 25% of shots fired in Sicily failed to explode. 1 in 4. Soldier confidence in the weapon was greatly undermined. Those are the actual words from the War Office acknowledgement. A considerable effort followed to remedy the ammunition problem before the weapon would be used on French soil. By early 1944, the War Office had developed improved ammunition. The number 426 Gray's fuse was triggered by deceleration rather than direct impact. Projected detonation rates rose to 90%. The Mark IV bomb arrived in July 1944. It featured revised construction to reduce dangerous rearward fragmentation. Earlier versions had injured operators at up to 100 yards distance. But Sicily's failure had already established the PIAT's reputation. Unreliable, dangerous to its own users, a weapon to avoid if possible. June 6, 1944. D-Day. British infantry storm Gold Beach carrying PIATs. Ahead of them lies Normandy. The ancient landscape of the Norman bocage awaited. The bocage would change everything. Ancient hedgerows created a maze of small fields. Thick vegetation bordered every field. Sunken lanes cut through the terrain. Visibility was measured in yards, not hundreds of yards. German tanks navigating these narrow lanes had to advance slowly. They often moved without infantry support because the terrain was so restrictive. This dense, compartmented terrain transformed the PIAT from problematic weapon into ideal tool. Think about the weapon's weaknesses: short range, inaccurate beyond 50 yards, heavy, slow to reload. In open terrain, these flaws were crippling, but in the bocage none of them mattered. German tanks had to approach within 50 to 80 yards just to navigate the terrain. The PIAT's accuracy issues disappeared at 30 to 50 yards. Even the crude sights and unpredictable trajectory became adequate at point-blank range. Now consider the weapon's unique advantages. No backblast. The American bazooka and German Panzers created dangerous 15-meter rear danger zones. Fire a bazooka from a building or dense vegetation, and you'd kill yourself or nearby friendly troops. The PIAT produced no backblast at all. You could fire it from anywhere. British infantry with PIATs could position in buildings, behind walls, in dense hedgerows. Positions that would be suicidal for bazooka teams became perfect ambush sites for PIAT operators. Fire, then displace before German infantry could locate you. The PIAT's minimal firing signature meant no muzzle flash, no smoke cloud. German tankers had no idea where the shot came from. Urban warfare multiplied this effectiveness. In villages like Villers-Bocage, Caen, countless smaller Norman towns, buildings provided hard cover. German tank movement was restricted to predictable routes. PIAT operators could fire from upper-story windows or ground-floor rooms, knock out a tank, then escape through buildings while German infantry searched for them. The same urban environment that made Panzerfaust deadly for Germans became ideal PIAT hunting grounds for British infantry. By June 1944, the ammunition failures of Sicily had been corrected. Mark III and IV bombs with improved fuses raised reliability to acceptable levels. British infantry received better training. Always carry the weapon cocked in action. Use two-man teams for sustained operations. Attack tank weak points from flanks or rear. The doctrine explicitly recognized the weapon's dual role, tank killer and housebreaker. It could be used as an indirect fire mortar for suppression or demolishing fortifications. The weapon was ready. The terrain was perfect. Now it needed men brave enough to use it. The Victoria Cross is Britain's highest military honour. It's awarded sparingly, only for most conspicuous bravery in the face of the enemy. 6 Victoria Crosses were awarded for PIAT actions. This demonstrates both the weapon's battlefield importance and the extraordinary courage required to use it effectively. May 16, 1944. Monte Cassino, the Gustav Line, German Panzer, Mark IV tanks counterattack Fusilier Francis Arthur Jefferson's company. The first PIAT team is eliminated entirely by tank fire. Every man killed. Jefferson seizes the PIAT. He runs forward under a hail of bullets. He positions behind a hedge. Then he stands up. Fully exposed, 20 yards from the Panzer, he fires. The Panzer Mark IV bursts into flames. All crew killed. Jefferson reloads. He advances on the second tank. It withdraws. Francis Arthur Jefferson was 23 years old. His Victoria Cross was stolen in a 1982 burglary. It was never recovered. Jefferson died 2 months after the theft. June 6, 1944. Gold Beach, D-Day. Company Sergeant Major Stanley Elton Hollis earns the only Victoria Cross awarded for D-Day actions. His PIAT action comes second that day. He'd already single-handedly captured 2 German pillboxes. At Crepon village, Hollis spots a German field gun at 100 yards. He takes a PIAT and crawls through a rhubarb patch with 2 Bren gunners. His PIAT shot misses. The German gun traverses and fires point blank. His 2 men are trapped. Hollis grabs a Bren gun. He charges forward alone in full view of the enemy. He draws fire deliberately. Both men escape. Stanley Hollis was 31 years old. King George VI decorated him personally on October 10, 1944. June 12, 1944. Burma, Ningthu Kong. Rifleman Ganju Lama is already wounded. His left wrist, right hand and leg are bleeding. Japanese medium tanks attack. He crawls forward through thick mud under withering machine gun and tank fire. At 30 yards range, he knocks out the first tank, then the second. Despite serious wounds, he moves forward and engages escaping tank crews with grenades. He kills or wounds them all before allowing evacuation. Ganju Lama was a bootier from Sikkim. He served with the 7th Gurkha Rifles. He'd already earned the military medal in May 1944 for destroying 2 other Japanese tanks on Tiddim Road. That's 4 confirmed tank kills with PIAT. The Viceroy, Field Marshal Lord Wavell, invested him at Red Fort, Delhi on October 24, 1944. Lama lived until July 1, 2000, dying at age 75. September 19-25, 1944. Arnhem, Operation Market Garden. Major Robert Henry Kane of the 1st Airborne Division's 2nd South Staffordshire Regiment becomes Arnhem's most prolific tank destroyer. Over 6 days he knocks out or disables at least 6 German tanks, including Tigers, plus multiple self-propelled guns, using primarily the PIAT. On September 21, he fires approximately 50 PIAT bombs over a house at advancing armour. An artillery officer gives him directions. When a Stug Mark III comes down the road, he engages at 30 yards, direct hit. Attempting to engage another tank, his PIAT bomb explodes prematurely. The explosion wounds him and throws him backwards. He continues fighting. When the last PIAT is destroyed, he uses a 2-inch mortar to repel German attacks with self-propelled guns and flamethrowers for over 3 hours. After the battle, he's found shouting like a hooligan after a PIAT exploded in his face. Robert Kane was 35 years old. He was the only Arnhem Victoria Cross recipient to survive the battle. October 21 to 22, 1944. River Savio, Italy. Torrential rain causes the river to rise 6 feet in 5 hours. Tanks and anti-tank guns cannot cross to support Private Ernest Alvier Smith's Seaforth Highlanders Company. 3 Panther tanks, 2 self-propelled guns, and 30 infantry suddenly counterattack. Smith leads his 2-man PIAT team across open ground under heavy fire. At 30 feet range, 10 yards, with his comrade wounded beside him, Smith stands fully exposed and fires. The Panther is disabled. 10 German infantry jump off and charge with Schmeissers and grenades. Smith meets them on the road with his Tommy gun at point-blank range. He kills 4. The rest retreat. He holds position using abandoned magazines found in a ditch until the Germans withdraw. Ernest Alvier Smith was known as Smokey. He was the only Canadian private to receive the Victoria Cross in World War II. Smith had been promoted to corporal 9 times and demoted back to private 9 times for disciplinary issues. He was 31 years old. Smokey Smith became Canada's last living Victoria Cross recipient. He died August 3, 2005 at age 91. His quote about the war, quote, "I don't take prisoners, period. I'm not paid to take prisoners, I'm paid to kill them," end quote. December 9, 1944, Faenza, Italy. Captain John Henry. Count Brunt, already holder of the Military Cross, uses PIAT among other weapons to help repel an attack by Germany's 90th Panzer Grenadier Division. The London Gazette announced his Victoria Cross on February 6, 1945. He was killed in action shortly after the engagement. 6 Victoria Crosses, 6 men, 23 to 35 years old, British, Canadian, Gurkha. Each one stood within 50 yards or less of German or Japanese tanks and fired. Each one survived long enough to kill enemy armour. Most survived the war. These weren't theoretical assessments on firing ranges. These were real men using a supposedly useless weapon to destroy real enemy tanks in actual combat. Let me tell you about Villers-Bocage. June 13, 1944, 7 days after D-Day. The British 7th Armoured Division, the famed Desert Rats, attempts to outflank Caen by pushing through Villers-Bocage. The battle becomes infamous for SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's Tiger Tank rampage. But the afternoon fighting demonstrated PIAT effectiveness against Germany's most feared armour. Around 1300 hours, Panzer Lehr Division advances 4 Panzer Mark IV tanks into Villers-Bocage, unsupported by infantry. Fatal tactical error in close terrain. Tigers are brought up and advance down the main highway. British forces from the 1/7th Queen's Regiment establish an ambush at the town square. PIATs, a Sherman Firefly, Cromwell tanks, and a 6-pounder anti-tank gun. A group of 3 Tigers splits up through back streets attempting to flank British positions. 1 Tiger is engaged and destroyed by the anti-tank gun. The other 2 Tigers are engaged with PIATs. One is knocked out, the other immobilized. British infantry stalk the Panzers through medieval streets. At day's end, 11. German tanks and assault guns are destroyed using anti-tank guns, PIAT rocket launchers, and sticky bombs at close quarters. Villers-Bocage validated PIAT tactics, patience, close-range ambush positions, urban terrain where tanks lose maneuverability, willingness to engage even Tigers at point-blank range. Tigers were the most heavily armoured tanks in the German arsenal. Yet PIATs could kill them when fired at flanks or rear at close range. By war's end, the reversal was complete. In 1944-45, the Canadian Army surveyed frontline officers who had recently left combat about the effectiveness of various infantry weapons. These officers had commanded troops in Normandy, Italy, and northwest Europe. The PIAT was rated ahead of even the legendary Bren gun for combat usefulness. This wasn't theoretical analysis. This was the collective judgment of officers who had led men using these weapons against German forces. Major Richard Lonsdale commanded the 11th Parachute Battalion at Arnhem. He wrote in his after-action report that the PIAT, quote, proved of immense value, end quote. His full assessment, quote, the tragedy of the operation was the shortage, and towards the end the complete lack of them. Time without number the cry was give me the PIATs, and we'll stay until Christmas, end quote. British paratroopers at Arnhem faced German armour with only light weapons. They desperately wanted more PIATs, not fewer. The British War Office voted with production orders. From August 1942 through 1950, Britain manufactured 115,000 PIAT launchers and several million bombs. By 1944, every British infantry platoon of 36 men was assigned one PIAT at platoon headquarters. 3 additional PIATs were issued at company headquarters level. This represented roughly 1 PIAT for every 36 to 40 infantrymen. Extraordinary allocation for a weapon once deemed ineffective under any conceivable conditions. The War Office supplied PIATs internationally. The Soviet Union received 1,000 PIATs and 100,000 rounds through Lend-Lease by March 1946. The Polish underground, Armia Krajowa, received 530 launchers and nearly 9,000 grenades from September 1943 to February 1945. The French resistance received significant numbers via airdrops. After the war, Israeli Haganah used PIATs in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Dutch forces carried them in the Indonesian War of Independence. The Indian Army used PIATs through the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War at the Battle of Longewala. Britain doesn't supply tens of thousands of weapons internationally if those weapons are ineffective. The PIAT's wide distribution demonstrated institutional confidence. Commonwealth forces embraced the weapon enthusiastically. Canadian forces achieved spectacular PIAT actions. Major David Vivian Curry received the only Canadian Victoria Cross in the Normandy campaign for actions at Saint-Lambert-sur-Dives, August 18–20, 1944, during the closing of the Falaise Gap. His mixed force of tanks, self-propelled anti-tank guns, and infantry with PIATs held a key position against repeated German counterattacks. They destroyed 7 enemy tanks, 12 88mm guns, and 40 vehicles. They killed 300 Germans and captured 2,100. Film cameraman Jack Stollery captured Curry accepting German surrender on August 19. He was the only Victoria Cross recipient to have their action caught on film. Australian Army units designated the weapon Projector Infantry Tank Attack, forming the acronym PITA. They allocated 1 PIAT team to each infantry platoon in jungle divisions from 1943. Australians used PIATs throughout the Borneo campaign in 1945 against Japanese tanks, vehicles and fortifications. They continued deploying them in the Korean War until replacement by American M20 super bazookas. Gurkha units demonstrated particular proficiency. Beyond Rifleman Ganju Lama's 4 confirmed tank kills across 2 separate engagements, the 7th Gurkha Rifles integrated PIATs effectively into Burma campaign tactics against Japanese armour. The PIAT's presence fundamentally altered British infantry psychology and German tactical calculations. Post-Dunkirk, British infantry possessed no effective means of stopping German tanks. The obsolete Boy's anti-tank rifle bred fatalism when facing armour. Infantry had to wait for anti-tank guns or tanks to arrive. They couldn't engage armour themselves. The PIAT changed that calculation. Every platoon possessed organic anti-tank capability. However imperfect, it was capability. Infantry could engage armour themselves at close range with realistic chance of success. The dozens of confirmed tank kills and 6 Victoria Crosses proved the PIAT could destroy even Tigers and Panthers under the right conditions. German forces responded to the Allied infantry anti-tank threat with tactical adjustments. Germans fitted side skirts, called Schürzen, to tanks. These detonated shape charges prematurely, reducing PIAT penetration effectiveness. Originally designed against Soviet 14.5mm anti-tank rifles in early 1943, these skirts provided some protection by causing premature shaped charge detonation. German doctrine emphasized not exposing tanks without infantry support in close terrain. They recognized unsupported armor in villages or bocage was vulnerable to close-range infantry attacks. When possible, German commanders tried to bypass towns and villages where PIATs could ambush from buildings. British after-action analysis noted PIATs became much less effective after Germans fitted armoured skirts, but the weapon remained valuable throughout the campaign. The German response itself validated PIAT effectiveness. Armies don't develop technical and tactical countermeasures against ineffective weapons. German military documentation reveals limited specific commentary on the PIAT by name. German forces appear to have categorized the PIAT with other Allied infantry anti-tank weapons as a general threat class rather than analyzing it as distinct. German tactical doctrine emphasized protecting armor from close-range infantry threats through combined arms, infantry screens to protect tanks, anti-tank gun positions in depth, avoiding exposure of tank flanks and rear. The absence of specific German analysis of the PIAT likely reflects several factors. British and Commonwealth sectors represented only part of the Normandy front. Germans faced a wider variety of threats simultaneously: American bazookas, Soviet weapons on the Eastern Front, conventional anti-tank guns. German reporting focused on tactical situations rather than weapon-specific identification. Tank commanders described being engaged by close-range anti-tank weapons without differentiating PIAT from bazooka or other systems. Confirmed German tank casualties to PIAT actions include multiple Panzer Mark IV tanks, Panthers, Tigers, and assault guns like the Stug Mark III. The 6 Victoria Cross actions alone account for roughly a dozen German armoured vehicle kills. The weapon's 100mm penetration capability was marginal against frontal armour of Panthers and Tigers, but effective against their side and rear armour. It could defeat frontal armour of Panzer Mark III and IV tanks that formed the bulk of German armoured forces through mid-1944. Britain officially retired the PIAT from service in 1951. It was replaced by Energa anti-tank rifle grenades and American M20 Super Bazooka rocket launchers. But 9 years of service and continued operational use through the early 1950s confirmed the weapon's value. Australian Army units carried PIATs to Korea in 1950–51 before replacement by M20 Super Bazookas. The weapon's continued frontline deployment in a major conventional war 5 years after World War II demonstrated sustained institutional confidence. Some PIATs lingered in Commonwealth inventories into the 1960s. There are anecdotal claims of their presence in conflicts as late as the 1960s, though these are difficult to verify. By this time, the weapon was generations obsolete. The PIAT represented an evolutionary dead end. Post-war anti-tank weapons universally adopted rocket or recoilless rifle designs, rather than spring-powered spigot mortars. However, several design features influenced subsequent development. Backblast elimination. The PIAT's safe use from confined spaces influenced development of recoilless rifles and later weapons designed for urban warfare. Dual-role capability. Modern weapons like the Carl Gustaf recoilless rifle incorporate the PIAT's concept of a weapon effective against both armour and fortifications. Shaped charge effectiveness. PIAT combat performance validated shaped charge technology that became universal in anti-tank warheads. So why did the British Ordnance Board's 1941 assessment fail so spectacularly? The evaluators stated the weapon would prove ineffective as an anti-tank weapon under any conceivable conditions. They couldn't conceive of the actual conditions where it would fight. Official trials emphasized range, accuracy, and penetration at 100+ yards under controlled conditions. Combat in Normandy, Italy, and Burma occurred at 30 to 60 yards in vegetation, rubble, and buildings. The PIAT's disadvantages became irrelevant. Its advantages became decisive. The evaluators imagined open-terrain tank battles. They didn't imagine medieval Norman villages or Burmese jungle tracks. In 1941, shaped charge technology remained relatively new and unproven at scale. The Ordnance Board questioned whether hollow charges could reliably penetrate tank armour under battlefield conditions. By 1944, improved ammunition with better fuses and construction proved the concept worked. The 1941 evaluation compared the PIAT predecessor to hypothetical better weapons. By 1942–43, the realistic comparison was PIAT versus nothing. The boy's rifle was useless. American bazookas weren't available. British industry couldn't produce alternatives quickly. The PIAT was the available solution. Availability trumps theoretical perfection. Official evaluations couldn't predict that soldiers would show extraordinary courage to close within 20 to 30 yards of German tanks to achieve kills. 6 Victoria Crosses testified to the audacity PIAT operations required. The weapon worked because men like Jefferson, Hollis, Lama, Kane, Smith, and Brunt were willing to stand up under tank fire at distances where accuracy problems disappeared. British infantry developed effective PIAT tactics through experience, ambush positioning, two-man teams, flank attacks, integration with other weapons, exploitation of terrain. Training improved from Sicily's disasters to Normandy's successes. The weapon's effectiveness increased as soldiers learned to maximize its strengths and minimize weaknesses. Multiple documented data points confirm PIAT battlefield effectiveness. The 6 Victoria Cross actions account for roughly a dozen German tank and assault gun kills at named locations on specific dates by identified soldiers. Dozens of other decorations were awarded for PIAT actions. Military Cross, Distinguished Conduct Medal, Military Medal. A Canadian Army survey of frontline officers who had recently left combat rated the PIAT ahead of even the Bren gun. This represents the most authoritative contemporary battlefield assessment available. 115,000 launchers and several million bombs manufactured through 1950 with continued service into the Korean War. 1 PIAT per platoon, plus 3 per company, represented approximately 1 PIAT per 36 to 40 infantrymen. Extraordinary allocation for an infantry weapon. 9 years of British service from 1942 to 1951, with some Commonwealth use continuing into the 1960s. This confirms operational value. 6 Victoria Crosses for PIAT actions, more than for almost any other single infantry weapon in World War II. This testified to both battlefield importance and exceptional courage required for effective employment. The PIAT's transformation from officially useless to most outstandingly effective weapon reveals the gap between peacetime assessment and battlefield reality. British evaluators examining the weapon on firing ranges in 1941 saw an ungainly, heavy, inaccurate device with limited range. They were correct. Those same characteristics mattered little to Stanley Hollis on Gold Beach, Ganju Lama in Burma, or Robert Kane at Arnhem. What changed was not the weapon, but understanding of where and how it would fight. The close-quarters combat of Normandy's bocage, Italian villages, and Burmese jungle tracks created conditions where the PIAT's unique advantages outweighed its considerable disadvantages. No backblast, silence, dual-role capability. These mattered more than range or accuracy when engaging tanks at 30 yards in a village street. Improved ammunition fixed early reliability problems. Better training taught effective tactics. Soldier courage compensated for short range. The 115,000 PIATs produced and the 6 Victoria Crosses awarded tell the story more reliably than any single statistic. British infantry who faced German armour with PIATs didn't consider them useless. They desperately wanted more. Major Lonsdale's Arnhem paratroopers, surrounded and outnumbered, crying, "Give me the PIATs and we'll stay until Christmas," delivered the ultimate combat endorsement. The weapon's rapid obsolescence after the war confirms it represented an evolutionary dead end in anti-tank weapon design. Rocket launchers and recoilless rifles proved superior for post-war requirements. But for British and Commonwealth infantry fighting in the specific conditions of 1943 to 1945, this unlikely weapon proved devastatingly effective. Spring-powered, brutally heavy, awkward to cock, accurate only at point-blank range. Yet in the hands of brave men willing to close with enemy armour, it worked. The British Ordnance Board was wrong, not because the PIAT's characteristics changed. They were wrong because they couldn't imagine soldiers like Frank Jefferson standing fully exposed at 20 yards from a Panzer Mark IV. They couldn't imagine Smoky Smith at 30 feet from a Panther, calmly aiming and firing. They couldn't imagine Ganju Lama crawling through mud with 3 wounds to get within 30 yards of Japanese tanks. The weapon worked not despite its limitations, but because British infantry fought with it under conditions where those limitations became irrelevant, and its unique capabilities proved decisive. From August 11, 1941, when it was declared ineffective under any conceivable conditions, to becoming the #1 rated infantry weapon by combat officers who actually used it. That transformation stands among the most dramatic reversals in military weapon history. The experts said it was useless. The soldiers who carried it into battle knew better.